Sure. I thought it was.
Janice, you're muted, just FYI.
I just unmuted myself. Thank you. Your attendance tonight is approval that we may record and then post the recording after tonight. Again, welcome. My name is Janice White. I'm the president of the Seattle Special Education PTSA, which is presenting tonight's program. We are an all-volunteer district-wide PTSA here in Seattle. We help and support students, families, and teaching staff as they navigate the special education system. We also offer educational programming around issues that affect the education of students who have disabilities, and we advocate for improvements in the special education system. Please notice that we have ASL interpretation tonight, as well as closed captioning available. So we do ask that if you speak tonight, please to either ask a question or make a comment, please state your name first to assist those who are following the ASL interpretation, and also try not to speak too fast. It helps both with the ASL interpretation as well as the closed captioning. I also want to say that it is our hope in the future to be able to provide additional language translation at more of our programs so that these programs are accessible to more families, especially those families who don't speak English at all or don't speak English as their first language. To do that well, however, our current annual budget is not enough to support translation at all of our events. So if you're interested in helping us change that, we could use and would appreciate your help. And I know that some of my colleagues will put the PTSA's email address in the chat so that you know how to contact us. Before I go any further, I'm going to ask Cheryl Lynn Crowther, who is co-vice president of the PTSA, to do our land acknowledgement tonight.
Thank you, Janice. This is Cheryl Lynn. I want to acknowledge that all of us, assuming you are in the greater Seattle area, are on the traditional land, the unceded land of the coastal Salish, and in Seattle in particular of the Duwamish. We acknowledge that they have been here since time immemorial, are still present today, and will be in the future, and also acknowledge that the students, Indigenous students, are highly overrepresented in special education. Thank you.
Just a couple more quick announcements before we get started. Nominations to be on the executive board of the Seattle Special Education PTSA are open until May 22nd. And so if you're interested, again, I'm sure one of my colleagues will post in the chat how to contact us. And after officers are elected at our June meeting, we'll be looking to fill out the board with committee chairs. So even if you're not interested in being an officer, but you might be interested in joining our board next year, please feel free to reach out and let us know. Two more quick plugs for future programming. Next Tuesday, May 17th, is our PTSA's monthly meeting. We will have Lee Collier and Scott Raub from OSPI joining us, and they're going to be talking about expectations and requirements to serve students who both have disabilities as well as mental health needs. Hope you can join us for that. And this event tonight is the second program in a three-part series. The first program was Science of Reading 101, and the recording of that program and the materials are posted on the Special Education PTSA's website in case you were unable to join us. And on May 23rd, we're going to be presenting a program called Literacy Advocacy 101. So we hope we'll be sending out more information about that very shortly, but we'll also be posting about it on social media but we hope you'll be able to join us for that session as well. We know that chat can be very active at our programs, which is really great. We do ask that folks try not to start side conversations in the chat that aren't related to the presentation, because that can be distracting to folks. And our presenter tonight is going to ask folks to put information into the chat along the way. So if we can try to, leave space for that, it would be helpful. She's also going to take questions at the end. And one of my colleagues is going to post, there are a couple of ways for you to send us your questions, either by typing them in the chat. We also have a document we're going to put a link to in the chat where you can put your questions directly. So with that, I'm going to ask Christy Rainier, who is co-chair of the PTSA's Family and Community Engagement Committee, and also a member of our Dyslexia Committee, and she is going to introduce our speaker tonight. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Janice. Hey, everyone. I'm Christy. Like Janice said, I'm a member of the Seattle Special Education PTSA, as well as a parent to a dyslexic child. I'll be helping the presenter with questions today. So like Janice said, you can put them in the chat or you can use our form. Do try to keep the questions broad and not specific to an individual child or situation. And that way they can benefit all of our audience. So our presenter tonight is Laura Rogan. Laura is the creator and author of Wired for Reading and co-author of the WordWires curriculum. She's a reading therapist, adult educator, counselor, and consumer translator of reading research. Laura earned her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology with a minor in English, a Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology, and a Master of Education in School Psychology. She's been working with children with learning differences and their parents for 25 years. Laura herself has dyslexia. She also teaches Wired for Reading teacher courses, conducts in-service workshops, has served on the board of the Puget Sound branch of the International Dyslexia Association, and still maintains her private practice of more than 20 years. So now I hand it over to Laura. Thanks for being here. And you are on mute, Laura.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So this is a presentation that I put together with my co-author, Jenny Block Garcia. We originally put this together over about 15 years ago for a local international dyslexia conference. And there has been so much growth in what we know about dyslexia in the 25, 30 years that I've been in the field. So I have been constantly over those years updating it, and I'm excited to be presenting this information. I was telling some of the people before this started that when I first talked about dyslexia, when I first moved to Seattle back in '96, I would say dyslexia and people would gasp as if I had said Voldemort or something. They're like, oh, we don't say dyslexia. I'm like, why? And it took me a while to get used to it because on the East Coast, there was much more open attitude about using the term dyslexia because it's actually a very helpful term if you know what it means. And so I think tonight's talk is so important to demystify what dyslexia is and what it isn't. Okay, so it turns out that dyslexia impacts about 20% of the population. Not everybody who is diagnosed with dyslexia will qualify for special education. They're not the same thing. But the processing issues that I'm going to be talking about tonight, it turns out that it creates an adverse impact for about 20% of the population. So as you are listening tonight, I would like for you to think about somebody on your shoulder, put somebody that you might know. I'm imagining there's probably somebody that motivated you to take time out of your week on a Tuesday to come to this, and put that person on your shoulder and kind of think about what I'm saying. And does that seem to match? Does that make sense? I will also talk about some of the co-occurring or comorbidities of dyslexia. The most common is something called dysgraphia. So we know that early intervention is critical, and we want to try to get in and do that early intervention right at the very, very beginning, as soon as we possibly can. I'm going to make sure that this is in the right spot here, because I don't feel like this started in the right spot. Oh, hold on one second. Oh, we're okay. All right, so before I get started, I want to break down what dyslexia means, because I think that part of the problem with dyslexia is people hear dys. So would you please write down dys? If you're in a safe place to do it. If you're driving, don't do this. But if you're in a safe place, one of the things that I'm going to be doing in this talk, and it's hard on Zoom because I can't hear you, but I want you to have active engagement. So I'm going to be asking you to write some things down. I'm going to be asking you to go in making some sounds with your mouth so you can kind of really experience it. And I'll be asking questions into the chat. So this is one of them where I want you to write down dys, D-I-S. That is a Latin prefix, and it means, and I like to use American Sign Language to help my students remember what it means. Dys, D-I-S, means not, opposite, away. And I think sometimes when people hear dyslexia, they're hearing the wrong dys. They're hearing that I can't do this one. And this is actually the Greek morpheme or meaning unit, and it means difficult. So it doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means it's challenging or difficult for me. And then lex means word. So literally it means you're having difficulty or challenges with words. Difficult with words. All righty. So this is Max. This is a real student that Jenny had many years ago. She just told me that the actual real Max is now, he is 19 years old and he's pursuing his dream of soccer in South America. So just a great update about Max. But this is Max, and I'm going to tell you a story about Max because I've met a lot of Maxes over the years. He's getting ready to go into kindergarten, and everybody is so excited for him. He's the kind of kid that likes to watch the Discovery Channel. He's really into dinosaurs. His grandma reads to him all the time about them, and he can tell you all about them. He'll talk your ear off. He really loves to play with Legos and loves to try to figure out how things work. They're like, wow, this kid's going to enjoy kindergarten. And he gets in there, and right away they start noticing that Max is not thriving the way they thought he would. By the middle of the year, he's starting to hide under his dot when it's time for circle time. He doesn't seem interested in learning about letters. By first grade, he's starting to have stomach aches when it's time to go to school. He's not able to pick up on the reading like his peers, and he's noticing it. And at the beginning of second grade, they decide to refer him for special education. So what happened? Because we were not expecting this for Max. Well, I know this is wall of text. Forgive me. I'm going to break this down for you. But this is the working definition of dyslexia. And it is, at its essence, it kind of starts to break apart why children are having trouble with reading. And it turns out it's a word level disability. So let's break it down. Dyslexia is neurological in origin. They now know with all the things we can do with science, we can look and see what's going on in the brain. And there are brain differences, and there are certain regions of the brain that aren't as efficient in the language processing and in being able to remember letters. It's not expected. So it kind of like takes everybody by surprise. And at its core, you have difficulty with accurate and or fluent word recognition. And so when they were trying to figure out why children are having this word level problem, they had a consensus. It's pretty remarkable because it's not just in English. They found it in multiple languages across the globe. When they're teaching reading formally, they found a phonological component that was the root cause of dyslexia. So I just want you to know that Greek is how we get grants in science. Greek gets grants. So they gave this a nice, fun Greek name, and I want to demystify that name for you. Humor me. I can't see you at home, and so you guys will help me out here. Everybody do this. Point to your ear. Everybody, I'm looking at you. There, point your ear and go, phono. Phono means sound, okay? And then logical. So what do you understand the logic of our sounds? And at its essence, dyslexia is a sound awareness, and it's a processing issue in the brain. It's not your ears. Your ears are working great, but processing that low order processing of sounds in your brain is just not working as efficiently. And this will always cause problems with spelling. You'll have kids that'll memorize enough words that they can read pretty okay, but they don't know what to do when they don't know what to do. They encounter a word they're not familiar with. They don't have strategies to break it down, but they've memorized enough words where they can read, but boy, their spelling, it shows up in their spelling. So this is a word level reading disability. That's not to say that there aren't other types of reading disabilities that have to do with language processing or that are going to affect reading composition and comprehension. It's just those are much less likely to be the cause because they're more rare. With that said, you will have kids that have dyslexia that will have comprehension problems. And I want to give you an example as to why. So I would like for you to think about the sentence I'm about to say and to get ready to put something in the chat. The land in Montana is expensive. The land in Montana is expensive. So put in the chat, what did I just say about the land in Montana? And then those of you that are monitoring the chat, you can let me know what they said.
I see it's expensive. How much it costs? It's expensive. It's expensive.
Oh, yeah. Okay, guys, this is my fault. I meant to say the land in Montana is expansive. The land in Montana is expansive. What does that mean?
It's vast, wide open, large, very big. It goes on.
Okay, so here's the deal. I changed one sound. One sound changed in my sentence, but the meaning of the sentence changes entirely. We don't realize it, but we process sounds and their order to the point of just automaticity, and it's unconscious, but it matters. So when you have a child who reads expansive as expensive, they will have comprehension issues, but it's secondary. It's because they had a hard time reading and decoding a particular word. So if you're doing diagnostic work, you always want to make sure you compare their listening comprehension and their reading comprehension. Okay, so the dyslexia is a term that is in the DSM-5. What this means is that it's in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and that is how we decide what is a protected disability. And dyslexia is on page 67. So I put this in the talk because there was a long period of time where people would say, oh, we don't use the word dyslexia, that's not a word that has any protective class, and it does. So dyslexia is in the DSM. It is a very common disability, and if you have a child that is diagnosed with dyslexia, they may not qualify for special education and they may not need special education, but they will qualify for a 504 if there's adverse impact to their education or life. So another term that you hear is specific learning disorder. A lot of times they'll say specific reading disorder, and they say that specific reading disorder is the same thing as dyslexia. The other thing they say in the DSM that's important is that you don't have to just look at a discrepancy to see if a child has this disability. You can also look at observations from classroom teachers, and you can look for a family history, because dyslexia is about 50% inheritable, according to the genetic studies. So, and I can even break down the different processing issues and what is inheritable and what people can look for. That tends to run in families. They mentioned at the onset that I have dyslexia. I was diagnosed when I was 19. My son has dyslexia, and we participated in a genetic study at the UW a few years back. And my parents were in town. They asked us all, the whole family went in, and we all did these really fun tests. And they told my father he was dysgraphic, and my mother, she was dyslexic, and they were in their 70s when they were diagnosed. So it's one of those things where our awareness of it is part of the reason why were, my mom and dad, I could have told you about my mom. She couldn't say snoqualmie to save her life. I had to say it so many times. And my dad, I found out later, had one of his teachers in second grade work with him all year on his handwriting. And so there were signs of it if you knew what to look for, but they weren't diagnosed until they were in their 70s. So we want to make sure also that according to the DSM-5, we want to be careful that we don't leave off children who maybe have a higher IQ. And so when you look at their performance, they look in the low average range, and they have dyslexia, they have the processing issues. And what happens with statistics is that you get regression to the mean. So their higher order skills will be here and their low order skills will be here, and things regress to that mean. And so they'll come out looking low averagey. It doesn't mean they don't have dyslexia, though they may not qualify for special education. Okay, some myths. Dyslexia does not mean you have above IQ, a below or above. If you, there's a normal distribution, and actually people that have dyslexia, part of the diagnosis is that you are somebody who your other skills that are not related to what we look at with dyslexia are at grade level or above. You also want to rule out any teaching that might be like inconsistencies in teaching. I had a student in one of my reading groups in my early career, and he was in my reading group because I was his third school, and it was only March. So he had moved around a lot and hadn't had that consistency of instruction. You want to rule out any emotional issues that students might be going, because we know that anxiety can kind of close you off to being able to even be able to think. So you want to make sure that you're not seeing something that's actually just related to anxiety or some other issues. And you want to make sure that their hearing is okay and that they don't need glasses. So we want to rule some things out with dyslexia before we are going to go ahead and move to that next level and look at processing issues. Other myths. Dyslexia affects boys and girls equally. Okay, this is a big one. This is a pet peeve of mine. Can you guys write this down? People with dyslexia don't see things backwards. I'll wait while you write that down, please. What happens with people with dyslexia, the reason why it seems like we see things backwards is that people with dyslexia have low order sequencing problems. We get letters out of sequence. We get sounds out of sequence. We get motor patterns out of sequence. So when we go to make the S, if we make it in the wrong spot, the S becomes backwards because we got our motor pattern backwards. So that's why it appears that we see things backwards, but absolutely we do not see things backwards. Not less intelligent. We're also not all brilliant and going to go start our own business. That's another one that's a new myth. It's lovely, but that's also not true. You don't outgrow dyslexia. I have dyslexia. It'll pop up if I'm like stressed or not getting enough sleep, or but it doesn't keep me from going where I want to go. I always tell parents that I want to turn it into a pebble. Right now it feels like a boulder blocking your path. I want to shrink that down and it'll be a pebble in your shoe. It'll kind of bug you a little bit and slow you down sometimes, but it won't keep you from doing what you want to do. The other thing to be aware of is that they've done a lot of research to try to figure out what should we do for people with dyslexia. And they found that treatments that don't specifically involve reading, and especially what's called the National Reading Panel, which I will talk about, those don't cure dyslexia. They don't work. So special reading glasses or special font, different color lenses. I mean, honestly, the different color lenses, I think that probably impacts more sensory sensitivity rather than dyslexia. Vision therapy is considered controversial. So any type of treatment that isn't specifically working on reading is something that you probably don't want to start with that. And I would, some of them I really would say be careful. And now I'm just having fun with my PowerPoint. Mythbuster. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty. This is an actual kid. This is a real live kid. And this was what the text was. I want you to look at what the text was, and then look at what Max did. So he's having trouble sounding out some words. He's trying to kind of sound it out. He's guessing at some words. That's interesting. Let's take a look at his word level, single word level. Okay, we give him the words chop, pen, and mouth. We don't say those words. We want him to read them. And look what he did. Look what he did. So I would like to turn your attention. This is where I'm going to need you to get in your chat. I would like you to say the word pen. Go ahead and say that word pen. You know what? You're in the Zoom room. This is a safe place. You go ahead and say pen out loud and tell me what part of your mouth is working when you get to, let's first, okay, hold on. I got ahead of myself. Say pen. What's your last sound? Let's get that. Everybody put in the chat the last sound. Start with an easy one.
I see N or mm. Lots of
Okay,
N's.
very good, you guys. Everybody go, and put in your chat what part of your body needs to work when you say What do you feel working in your mouth?
I see front of mouth, tongue, more tongue, tip of tongue.
All right, you guys, awesome with you guys got it. So it is the tongue. And here's the deal. We think that the tongue is like just the tip of the tongue, but it's actually this amazing muscle in our body. Without it, we can't talk. And I'm going to be picky and say, is it the tip of the tongue or the middle of the tongue or the back of the tongue? What are they saying?
I don't see any new comments yet. Okay, middle, tip, rest curls toward roof of mouth. I see more tip with a question mark.
Okay.
So a little of both.
A little bit of both. All right. Well, here's the deal. I want to let you know that is happening in the same spot in your mouth as that T. So now I want you to go even close your eyes if you need to feel what's happening in there. Is that your tip or is that your back of the tongue?
I see underside of tip.
So we got tip. Anybody else feel like it's the tip?
Lots of tip. You
guys got it. Okay. And t share the same place. In linguistics, we call this the place. And because N and T both happen at that tip of the tongue, they're likely to be confused. If somebody's having a hard time hearing sounds in their order, they're more likely to confuse the N and the T. People think it's a letter thing. It's not. It's a sound thing. And so being able to help kids explain what's happening in their mouth can help clarify it. So that was like, oh yeah, I see N and T getting mixed up a lot. The other thing we saw Max doing was the OU and the OA was getting mixed up. So here's what I want you to do. I would like you to count out how many vowel letters we have in English. I can sing the song for you, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. So count those up. What are they saying?
I see 5, 6.
If we count Y, we get 6, and we desperately need Y. So we're going to count Y. So we have 6 vowel letters. Do you know how many vowel sounds we have in English? Have you ever thought about it? I don't understand why we don't leave kindergarten knowing this. So make your guess. We're going to play the high-low game. How many vowel sounds in English? Just make a good educated guess.
First one was 20. Someone said, I think 44. I see 30.
Ooh. Right,
17.
right. How many? All right, here's what we're going to do. Go less than 20. Just like 2 less. Here's my hint.
I see, yeah, 18.
18, everybody get 18, ding, ding, ding. Write down 18. This is a problem we have in English that you don't have in other languages. Spanish has 5 and 5 that match on pretty well. They do have some diphthongs but it's just what's called a transparent language. English is not transparent. It's called opaque. We don't have enough letters to represent all of our vowel sounds. So we have to do things like have the vowel teams. So the OU mixing up with the OA, it creates a letter confusion. So we are going to find that dyslexia is going to move beyond just awareness of sounds in their order. There is going to be a letter component. So we're going to talk about the first 2 processing issues that we know from the research that attribute to or explain dyslexia. One is phonological memory. So everybody point to your ear and say phonological memory. You can even say it like 3 times and you're kind of using your phonological memory. Phonological memory, phonological memory, phonological memory. More on that later. And the other is phonological awareness. We're also going to talk about something called rapid naming or rapid automatic naming. That's another processing issue that explains why a student is struggling with word level reading. And the last one, don't panic, I'm going to demystify that Greek. It's called orthographic processing. Let's break it down. Everybody say ortho. Okay. I'm going to show you what ortho means. Think about like the orthodontist. That'll help you to figure this out. Ortho means keep it straight and follow the rules. You have to kind of like put on your teacher at recess voice. Keep it straight. You'll remember it better if you do this with me. Keep it straight and follow the rules. So ortho has keeping straight, something like that. And then everybody grab your paper, your pretend paper and your pretend pen. Graph means to write. It means write or draw. So orthographic means, are you able to keep straight the rules of our writing? And it's going to directly feed into that spelling and letter choice. It helps with something called orthographic or mapping. Okay, first we're going to talk about the phonological awareness. It's the one we know the most about. It's also the one we can do the most about. So there are different developmental stages. Most of this happens in preschool and the beginning of kindergarten. So if you have a child who's having trouble with any of these segmentation, that last one, I'm going to say move that to the end of kindergarten. I would say if you go, boy, that kiddo on my shoulder, I see that. Just know it's a red flag. We're not diagnosing, but it's a red flag, and you might want to get pursue some other assessment. The first one is rhyme. Can a child rhyme? And that's something they can do about age 3 or 4. So I know this is easy. Can you put a word that rhymes with bat into the chat? Oh, there, I gave you one. By the way, you don't have to do real words. Dr. Seuss made up words. We can too. Let's just have fun. Give me some words that rhyme with bat.
Fat, cat, pat, flat, rat, mat, hat.
Fantastic. That is something that is a preschool level skill. And if you have a 4 or a 5-year-old that's struggling with rhymes, that's a red flag. So with my son, Liam, he was about to turn 5. I said, Liam, what rhymes with bat? And he said, ball. And I'm like, I thought so. So I was able to help get him diagnosed pretty young. And that helped a lot for him. The next one in the developmental stages is something called counting your syllables. So normally when you count syllables, you clap. And I like clapping because it really gets to the essence of what a syllable is. A syllable is a beat. However, I don't like clapping because my students have a hard time hearing sounds in their order, and they have trouble with sequencing, and they don't know how many times they clapped. I remember as a child being like, I don't know how many syllables, and I would have to look at my neighbors' collective response. So what I learned is that if you put the syllable beats on your body, you can think. And you know, if you get to your hand, you have 1. You get to your elbow, you have 2. You get to your shoulder, you have 3. Most English-based words don't go past that. They longer. If you get in bigger kid words, you do. Everybody, please put your name beats on the body. I am Laura. So go ahead and do that. I'll help you remember it. How many people out there you have 2 beats? Can you please put your name into the chat if you have 2 beats? That's the most common. So lots of names will probably pop up. Seen a bunch of 2-beat names.
Yep.
They're going to be one of them.
Crystal.
All right, let's do Crystal. Everybody, let's check that. Crystal. Yep, that's a 2-beat. Anybody have a 1-beat?
Beth.
Everybody check. Beth. Nice job. So I bring this up because this is something you guys can start using right away. It's a really good technique. People who have dyslexia, we have a tendency to drop beats. And I always make the really lame joke of, if I shouldn't be dropping beats because I'm not a rapper. Ha ha. I'm notorious for leaving out beats. If you get a spell check and it says no replacements found, like that emoji of like, I don't know what you're spelling, the first thing you should check is that you have a vowel sound for all of your beats. Every time you have a beat, you have a vowel sound. And if you spelled it wrong, you probably left out a syllable beat. And that's the best way to get that tool to work for you. So one time I was working with a student, true story. I was trying to help him spell the word tarantula. The boy and I were going tarantula. I had the mom go, Laura, can you check your beats? So everybody, please put the word tarantula on your body and see what happened to me. Tarantula. There are 4 beats and I had dropped it down to 2. So counting, keeping track of syllables and their order, that is actually something that you can do in kindergarten. But you have people that have dyslexia, that's a red flag. They may have trouble with syllables. The next one is onset and rhyme. So please say the word play. Say the word play.
Play.
Okay. Anything before the vowel sound is called the onset. So there's not just one sound coming in the word play at the onset. Can you please put into the chat what you hear and feel as the onset in the word play?
PL or pla or pla.
Yeah, and I would probably pronounce that as pull to get rid of that sound. Very good. All right, and your rhyme is your vowel sound on. So your rhyme in this word is A. And that is how you are able to generate rhymes. You just basically change the onset, but keep the rhyme. I wish they didn't spell it, it's like a homophone there, but so in the word coil, k is the onset and oil is the rhyme. Being able to discern that again is something that happens in kindergarten. But researchers recently have said that the most bang for your educational buck is something called segmentation. And that is something you can start to do in kindergarten. And certainly by the end of kindergarten, kids are ready to segment, especially 2 and 3 sounds. So this would be where you have a word like cat, and you are able to be able to tell there are 3 sounds. K, at. In coil, k, oi, ol. In play, p, ol, a. And one of the things that I do in Wired for Reading is I have kids stretch those rather than segment them, like where they go into individual sounds, because the research also shows that transfers better later when they're reading and spelling. So play, stretch to find your vowel, play, stretch to find that second sound. Okay, so I'm going to move on. The types of errors you see when a child has phonological processing, they tend to guess at words. They get the sounds out of order. They will mess up the order of sounds, like in quits to quest. They got the sounds of the T and the S mixed up. It's not a letter thing, it's a sound thing. The other thing that I see all the time is they will confuse the short vowels. And so I just want to take a moment to talk about short vowels. The short vowels are a single vowel letter. It's closed in by a consonant, and it's the easiest spelling choice. And so it's where a lot of phonics programs start. Unfortunately, they are the hardest when it comes to being able to hear the sounds and the sound differences. So they're the worst place to start for someone who has phonological processing issues, or if they're MLL, because they may not have this in their native language and they may have a hard time hearing those different sounds. Let me prove it to you, okay? I'm going to give you the universal sounds. These 3 sounds are in every language on the planet. And I've checked this because I only speak 1 language and I'm still working on it. So I've checked this with friends that are multilingual and they agree with me. Here we go. Everybody make the cheesiest smile you possibly could. E. That is a universal sound in every language. Now I want you to open your mouth wide, like I'm trying to see the back of your throat. Ah, get that tongue down. That is a universal sound. And then round out your lips really round. Ooh, ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah. Those are the 3 universal sounds. Every language has them. Now I want you to look in. If you can see yourself in the screen, you got a built-in mirror. If you have a friend sitting next to you, look at their mouths, but I want you to look at your mouth and say E, ooh, E, ooh. Pretty easy to tell apart. You can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it. I'm going to have you compare that. I'm going to grab a pen too. I'm going to compare that with your short vowels. Here I go. I, eh, I, eh. See how close they are? Look at the short vowels. I, a, ah. They're really close. They sound a lot alike. And kids they'll be fine individually. A, apple, mom, I got it. But as soon as it's in a word, especially a multi-syllable word, it gets mushy. It gets difficult to perceive. So you see it with those short vowels, especially, and unfortunately, and not with the best of intentions, we're starting at the worst spot for kids with phonological processing when we start with the short vowels. I start with the universals. I start with E, oo, and ah, and I add in the sound because that's our thinking sound in English. And then the other thing I want to let you know about my mistakes I'm seeing where I'm like, looks like a phonological. Do you see how my little friend has left off the P? That's a notorious thing that we see with kids with phonological processing problems. They leave the middle part of a consonant blend out. The most common error, and you're going to see it in the, here, let me take you to spelling. Well, before I do that, let's go to nonsense words. This is what they do with nonsense words. They will guess a real word. You say 14 times, these are not real words, and they just guess. They look at the first letter and they guess. I want to show you his spelling. He's making some classic stuff here. Do you see he did champ and he spelled it chap? He's saying champ. When you listen to him, he's saying champ. But when he's perceiving it, he's not able to hear that M sound because it's too close to what the P sounds like. So I'm going to prove it to you. Everybody go, and now go, pop, 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 pop. Are you using your lip or are you using the tip of your tongue for those two sounds? Lips. Pop, pop, lip. They both use the lip, and that's why they like to blend. And it turns out with linguistics, we can predict which consonants will blend with each other. They both have lip, they're going to blend. They both have tip, they're going to blend. So nt, N and T like to blend. When that happens, my kids are really vulnerable to not hear the medial sound in that consonant blend. So they're not going to hear that M. Their brains just don't perceive it. And so the sounds go missing. It's a classic that happens not only in English, but in French and German, according to researchers. It's the most common error that people with dyslexia make in their spelling is to leave out the medial blend of a consonant blend, especially the one after the vowel sound. So that's a classic error that I see all the time. I also was able to ask about what was going on with the V, the HVO. Here's what happened. Everybody make the V sound. And now make the F sound. They are literally the same sound. One of them, here, put your hand right here. That F is whispered, is voiced. Other than that, they're the same sound. So kids are really vulnerable to mix those up. And we have a whole bunch of those that where one is whispered and one is buzzing. He was sounding out huffs. He said, I know it needs a vowel, so I put an O. So he knew that there was a vowel, but he didn't have any sense of where that vowel happened in the word. I once had a student say, when it doesn't look right, I just slap an E on the end. Lots of words have E on the end. And I'm like, good for you. We're going to know why. And then in a word like swish, we just got the sounds out of order. Okay, so that is our phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is awareness of sounds and their order in words. And it is the most common processing problem of dyslexia. It's the main kahuna. That's every kid I've ever worked on in my entire career had that to some extent. You can have it mild, you can have it moderate, you can have it severe, but that is the real core deficit that's causing that barrier to learning to read and spell in your typical phonics fashion. So you got to address that first before you go to phonics. The other one that has to do with phono, with sounds, is phonological memory. And this is information that comes in your ear, but doesn't mean anything to you. We've gotten really A lot less practice because of our phones. So, you know, when someone goes, oh, I'm going to give you my phone number, you're like, can you just text me? Because you don't want to have to like remember a phone number. We used to not be able to do that back in the day. And so a phone number is actually an example of a phonological memory task. So the types of errors you see with kiddos is that they'll be sounding out a word. They painstakingly sound out com, pu, ter. Oh, what was it that I read already? They've already forgotten the first syllable. The other thing is that somebody, like, I'll ask that, I don't want to say Alexa's name because I don't want it to turn on, but I'll ask her to spell for me and she goes T-H-O, yeah. I'm like, I don't know. It's too auditory rote, it's gone. So it's really important, if you're going to spell for your child, please just write it down so he or she can look at it. Phone numbers. If I tell you a phone number, you're going to be like maybe going, wait, what was the middle numbers? They slip away. Actually, math facts are very rote and auditory for students. It's almost like memorizing an address. So I see math facts being a problem for a lot of the students I work with. They think they're not good at math. They're actually going to be maybe potentially very good at math once we get through this math fact, but it's a rote auditory memory task. There also can be something with another one of the processing that can be pulling and making that tricky. Verbal directions that don't have a lot of meaning. I'm supposed to go upstairs, but I don't remember why. So those are examples of phonological memory errors. I'm going to give you guys a quick test. You have to make sure you don't write this down, or else, you know, it defeats the purpose. It's not at all looking at, it's not a visual. Ready? 206-234-7331. Repeat those numbers, please.
206-234-7331.
Whoever did that was fantastic. You got it. That's my phone number if you're curious. I'm somebody who goes, I don't remember. It's just really tricky for me. Another one, well, there's the other one. There's my phone number. You all know it. Here's another one. Instructor mamble. Say that word.
Instructor mamble.
That's one of the tests they do. They just give you nonsense words and you have to repeat it. I hope I said the right word. I did. Wouldn't that be ironic? Made it up. Okay. So you have now finished my talk about the phonological. We're not done yet. There are two processing issues that have to do with the phonological. One is your awareness of sounds in their order, that's the most common. The other is your just rote auditory memory. It goes in your ears, doesn't mean anything to you, it slips away. Those two are the core deficits of dyslexia. According to Dr. Beringer at the University of Washington, she's now retired, she says that when you get this next one, orthographic processing, it's the core deficit of dysgraphia, having a challenging time with writing, and that usually has to do with spelling. And there's a 70% co-occurrence with dyslexia and dysgraphia. This one's very, very common. I see it all the time with my students. Ortho means keeping track of the spelling rules. So I'm spelling the word blue, and there's nothing about the sound that's going to tell you which choice to make. Any of those four could work, correct? Now, can you eliminate any? Because you're like, yeah, but we just don't spell it that way, Laura. I think we can get rid of some of them. And then if I add meaning in, then you can make the choice. The wind blew and blew, and my kite was flying away. So now right into the chat, which of the blue is the right answer? The wind blew and blew, and my kite flew away.
EW.
And you know what, you guys, I bet you can prove it to me. I bet you can say, Laura, I can prove it to you, because you can go to the dictionary. But why is it EW? Why isn't it the UE one? Why isn't it the OO one? Some scribe 1,000 years ago, I mean, these are things that are just letter choices that were made a long time ago that got codified. And even the way we sometimes talk will change, and that's the code. That's how we have it in the dictionary. So there is an element that has nothing to do with sounds, but has to do with your visual memory.
Someone wrote it's the past tense of blow, O-W.
Very good. That's good morphological or meaning knowledge. All right, this one always makes me nervous because you guys, I'm just going to admit to you, my orthographic coding ability is not strong. Okay, you guys got that word. Don't write it down. Just stare at it for a second. What was the third letter? Write it in the chat. I don't remember. It was a no. I remember the first time I gave it, I'm like, I don't remember. I had to go back and look. So what happens, I've actually given this test to kiddos. You show them a word, then you take it away and you say, what was the second letter? What was the last letter? And we're testing the brain's ability to hold on to visual information. And because it's the letters, we know exactly where it is in the brain. Are you curious where it is in the brain? Raise your hand if you're a righty like me. Most of us should be raising your hand. Okay, very good. Take your left hand and pat the back of your head. That is where your letterbox, or your ability to hang on to letters and see them in your mind's eye. And if you're a strong speller, you can say, thank you, letterbox, for helping me remember those letters. And if you have trouble with spelling like me, you're like, we'll work on it. We'll get it better. We have strategies. Now, for my lefty friends out there, where are my lefty friends? You're just going to go to the right side. Still in the back. Your occipital is in the back. So they actually can look at this and say, watch it light up while you're trying to remember what letter was that. Oh, that was an O. And some people have a really strong letterbox. They can just remember those letters. They're like, I can just close my eyes and see it. I can make it sparkle. And I'm like, isn't that cool? I can't. I close my eyes and I don't see anything. So I have trouble with spelling. You're a good speller. Good thing I'm good at swimming. You know, we all have something we're good at and something we struggle with. And unfortunately with this one, it really can impact spelling. And there are some things you can do, but you're going to want to make sure you are multisensory and you're bringing in my hand. How many of you out there, if I said, I need you to spell the word cantaloupe for me, and you were like, okay, sure, but I need to write it down. You know who you are? That's because we don't realize it, but our hand helps our eye. And so we can remember writing the letters in their order, and then that helps us remember it. And so there is this wonderful connection between the hand helps inform the eye. Honestly, back when it came to the phonological, I was using the mouth to inform the ear. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but when you're wearing a mask, people have a hard time understanding what you're saying and hearing you. I had to go, my name is Laura Rogan with an R, because they would want to look up Logan when I had the mask. I never had to do that before masks. So we don't realize it, but we watch each other's mouths to help us understand. And so the mouth helps the ear and the hand helps the eye. Let's take a look at some of these errors. Okay. One of the things that kiddos do, it's really cute. They try to sound out their sight words. So especially if they just have orthographic processing issues and their phonological processing is kind of intact and more typical, they really will be over phonetic. So they really try to sound out that word could. You can't sound that word out. That is what they also known as a sight word, because you just have to know it. I call it an oh, you little darling word. The word 8 is special. Isn't that a fun one? The only thing fair about that word is the T. I'm going to tell you a fun fact. Everybody swallow so as not to spit on the computer. I'm going to teach you how to make the GH sound. It died out of English 600 years ago, but it's alive and well in German. So if you speak German or some parts of Spanish or Hebrew, you make this sound better than I will, because I'm going to fake it. Okay, swallow and go. Isn't that fantastic? So that word is at least 600 years old. And I always say to the children, I'm like, oh my goodness, can you imagine being 600 years old? I was compared to my grandma. She'd come down and she had a little pill hat and gloves. She looked beautiful. Oh my gosh, you guys, she would have that like fur thing with like the little fox head. Ooh. And she looked fantastic, but she did not dress the way that I would dress because she was older than I am. So, Shani, this is the way I spell it. You know, this is just a really old great grandma word. We're going to have to just love on this word and come up with some strategies to remember it. But your kids that have that orthographic coding, they're going to be the ones that are going to need to have some work, and you're going to have to get the hand to help. Close your eyes and try to write the word. See if your hand remembers it. So I actually have some free I have a video about how to handle this problem on my website. And I also created a couple of free classrooms in the Koala. It's a platform for tutoring, and I put a whole bunch of lessons in there. So I invite you to go, because that research came straight out of the University of Washington, and it really is effective. You don't want to do it for every word in English, but for words like ate and could and were, they're not fair. You can't sound them out. You're going to have to use your sketchpad. This one's great. Can you guys read it? Anybody out there who's a kindergarten or first grade teacher, they whip through this, no problem. But the worst thing was riding in a car, excuse me, with a baby screaming and whacking me in the face. So the sounds are in the right order, but they don't know the spelling conventions. That's a sign, red flag, that we've got some orthographic, although you have to be careful. This is normal, typical, but starting in about, if they've had these words and they've been explicitly taught how to spell them and they're not remembering them, that's where you have the red flag. Okay, so we have learned 3. Phonological awareness is your awareness of sounds in order inside words, and that's your most common. Phonological memory has to do with really just keeping information in a loop and remembering rote auditory. Don't forget the keys. Don't forget the keys. Don't forget the keys. When you chant that to yourself, you're doing your phonological memory loop. Orthographic is just your ability to see letters in your mind's eye and know, and that you go, I know screaming has an EA. Why? I just remember it. I can see the word. And you can also, for people like me, you can learn well, honestly, UI is more common because it's a root. You can actually do some Viva Las Vegas spelling is what I call that. The last one is something called rapid naming or rapid automatic naming. So we're in the final stretch here of our processing issues. I would like you to imagine that you can see a Costco-sized building. Can you guys imagine that? Okay. And it's full of filing cabinets, and the filing cabinets are full of words. That's what your brain is doing. And as you go along in this life, you're filing things away. And you got a librarian whose job it is to fetch things when you need it, that retrieval. Now, I don't want you to confuse it with rapid naming is different than word finding. So I'm going to tell you what word finding is first. Word finding is when you can't think of the word. So I had this really badly when I was pregnant. I go, honey, I'm hungry. I need the big thing to eat with, and it's round. I put it in my mouth. I couldn't come up with the word spoon, right? That's word finding. That's not what this is. Rapid naming is how quickly can your librarian fetch that information for you, that word. Do you have Flash from The Incredibles? Or do you have, I always think of Tim Conway. I'm dating myself, but if you don't know who that is, go YouTube it. It's hilarious. But Tim Conway being the little old man going, okay, I'll go get that for you. I'll go. It's hilarious. Him falling down the stairs. Sorry, but that's just gold. So do you have more of that librarian who's maybe you have somebody who's on roller skates? My librarian is not Dash, but my librarian is on roller skates. You want to hear a Dash person, you're going to have, those people at the end of the Geico commercial that go terms and conditions, and they say really fast. Those people have a Dash type librarian. They can pull words fast. So people that have a hard time with rapid automatic naming, what you see is that they take longer to read something. So we would expect an 11th grader to read this in 7 seconds, and my 11th grader took 19 seconds. The other thing that's interesting is he had no trouble with parasites. He reads those big, hard words well, but for some reason, it's the little grammar words that he struggles with. So I always listen for this. Oh, they're missing the little words. Oh, they're leaving off the suffixes. That's a red flag for rapid naming. I want to show you what that looks like when you test it. So what they do is, and this isn't an actual test, I'm not allowed to show you that, but they have like letters, for example, and they say, I would like for you to name these letters as quickly as you can. Just go as fast as you can. And then you discreetly will time them. And then the kiddos that don't have a rapid naming sound like this. D, Y, S, D, X, I, A, Y. They just rattle them off because our librarian is fetching them. And we have a lot of practice fetching that. Now, obviously, you want to make sure that a child knows their letter names. This is something where you wouldn't use it with a kindergartner, but you can start using this in first grade. It's normed. A child who has rapid naming, and I've given this test, it sounds like this. There's two different possibilities. One is D, Y, S, D, X, I, A. So you don't get that pattern. You get a lot of ums, you get like boom, boom, and then there's a pause. The other thing they do, I have a friend who tests all the time. She says, I always have to shut the door because it is socially acceptable to slow down if you're yelling. So she's like, a lot of my kids with rapid naming will go, D, Y, S. They just kind of hold it while they're so clever, so clever. And you just record it. And then this is all normed. But those kiddos that have a rapid naming problem, what happens is that it's like your librarian, it's got to go fetch, and it's just taking them longer. If it's the word, let's do the word elephant. Can you guys say the word elephant? Okay. I would like for you to put in the chat all the ways you have thought about elephant, all the ways that you've encountered elephant, like babar is an elephant. Horton here's a who is an elephant. Asian elephants are different than African elephants. Just kind of put in the chat all the ways you can think about elephant. We'll do a brain dump. Everybody will jump in there. What are we seeing?
Big gray savanna, Dumbo, herbivores, elephant in the room, elephant never forgets. Elephants have tusks. Cute baby elephants chasing birds.
Okay, so what happens is that your librarian has all these different files for elephants. So when I'm reading, even though elephant is kind of a hard word, it's got some Greek spelling patterns in there. But once I've learned it, my librarian can pull elephant pretty fast. But if I ask you guys, what are all the ways that you can tell me about the word of? You'd be like, somebody's not muted. There we go. You guys, the word of is hard. Like, what does of mean? Of is not a picturable word. It's not a word that your librarian has lots of files for. So if you have rapid naming problems, you're going to find that they have a hard time with prepositions and they have a hard time with pronouns. My son would always mix up she and he when he was little. And it wasn't until I helped him understand what a pronoun does. I'm like, it's so we don't sound like Elmo. That's what I finally told him. And we talked about like, mommy is a she. I said, she's one girl. And he said, mommy and Roan and sister. And then after that, he never mixed it up again. But until we put a little bit of meat on the bones, his librarian didn't have enough files and he has rapid naming problems. Here's the thing about rapid naming problems. Oh, I should go back. I'm going to have you guys write this down. Math facts are classically difficult for people with rapid naming. And you can get somebody, rapid naming is the one that the researchers for 25 years have looked at, and they're saying there isn't a lot we can do to make rapid naming change. It's just part of who you are. You can look at, if you guys have questions about this, I could tell you a little bit about the nuances. I'm going to move on, but the walkaway message is, if you've been working on math facts and you've gotten faster, but you're done, like you can just tell this is as fast as we're going to get. It's so important that kids with rapid naming problems get accommodated. They're going to need maybe access to audio when it comes to their reading load, especially as they get older and their reading load gets heavier. They're going to need access to a calculator, especially after we're not testing math facts anymore, or maybe a number grid if we are still testing math facts, because there's only so much they can do. My son who has this calls it distracting math, and it just makes him anxious. But if he has a calculator, he calms down. Math was just a nightmare in our house until like all the way through elementary, but it got better I said, as it's getting harder, it's getting easier. He's like, it sure is. And as soon as he got that calculator, he calmed right down. He did fine in calculus. So I just will beg people out there, like really advocate for that calculator or that number grid, and really look into getting kids access to something called Learning Ally, which is a great free service where you can have audiobooks that light it up with real humans reading it. My son is in college now. He's very well compensated. He uses his Learning Ally all the time to keep up with the reading load. So those are things that you're going to have to accommodate for that rapid naming issue. Kids can have issues in just phonological awareness, then that's their issue. They may have phonological and also have orthographic. They have both. They may have all three: phonological awareness, phonological memory, and orthographic, but not rapid naming. So what people that are doing the diagnostic is they can look at these four and to what extent. So you can have double or triple deficits. You can have, on top of that, you can sprinkle a little bit of attention deficit. There's comorbidity there is 20 to 40%. And then that's going to also maybe exacerbate these issues. So this is something from my former advisor from the University of Washington. She said the core deficits of dysgraphia or orthographic coding, and kids may have that graphomotor part. They may have a hard time holding the pencil or knowing how to do the sequence of the strokes to make the letters. People with dyslexia have orthographic coding and phonological awareness and memory issues. And then she talks about kids that have an OLD or a specific language processing that will impact their ability to understand meaning units in words. And I have shared with the group, I have created a comorbidity chart, and it is in, I have a chapter. I also have that chart separately, and I can share that with you all, that you can look and see what the research says about different comorbidities. We do know from the research that phonological is 50% inheritable. Orthographic issues are 60% inheritable. The other piece that the researchers have turned their attention to in the last 10 years are the strengths that travel with dyslexia. The researchers are coming and saying, you know, this is just a different problem-solving apparatus that people with dyslexia have. People that have dyslexia are more likely to so I want to be careful here. Doesn't mean we're all geniuses and we're all going to start our own company. It doesn't mean we're all gifted. That's not what it is. But what they find is that when they look at people with dyslexia, there's a disproportionately high number of them that have high spatial reasoning. Not to say that everybody with dyslexia does. I don't. My spatial reasoning isn't strong. But I have a number of students that have Lego brains. They can really just, I had one that pull. You guys, I had a bunch of random Legos and my little guy just grabbed it and put it together in 2 seconds. He has that strength. And I want to make sure he knows that. And that's part of who he sees himself as a learner. One of the things they definitely see are people with dyslexia tend to have a really good ability to see the big picture. We have trouble with the details, but we see like the big picture and how this is connected to that. And have you ever thought about putting those together? So we think outside the box. They said that actually narrative reasoning or storytelling was one of the higher ones that was most likely. And dynamic reasoning is thinking on your feet or having flexibility. And so they looked at these sub strengths and they said there's a proportion to have this strength and that strength. So it's something for us parents to think about and us educators to think about, like that we don't just focus on what's not working, but we also think about the whole picture of the child. And then the folks from the University of California at San Francisco did an elegant study, and they said across all of their populations of people with dyslexia that were elementary, high school, prison population, they said all of them showed emotional reactivity. And what this meant was they showed a video. Have you guys seen Inside Out? I think that's what it's called. You know, with the different, you have the joy, you have anger. You guys remember that one? So think of those different emotional reactions. So that's what they were pulling for. So they had a little baby that was giggling because their dad had like erased an Etch-a-Sketch. And they filmed, and they also like were paying attention to the heartbeat and their breathing. They were like looking at it from multiple levels. And the people that were in the study that saw the baby laughing that didn't have dyslexia were like, and the people that had dyslexia were like this. They just had this big emotional reaction. The same thing happened when they showed like cleaning out earwax, and the people that didn't have dyslexia were like, ew. And the people that did were like, oh gosh. So what this means is that people with dyslexia, they said across the board, they read the room. And I would say they read the room sometimes better than they read the page. They can walk in and go, oh, somebody's upset. They don't know what to do about it maybe, but they're really vulnerable to be in an environment that's going to be safe for them and understand them. And so it's something where it's a vulnerable strength, I would say. We want to really watch out for them for anxiety. They're much more likely to have, there's a co-occurrence of anxiety. There's also a co-occurrence of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're more likely to have that because their reactions can be real big. So, but they're also going to thrive if they're in an environment that really gets them. All right. So I wanted to make sure I didn't just talk about things that are not working. The other thing is that this is a researcher who's going to be doing they're having a whole conference about this, and she's doing a talk, and she's like, boy, if you have dyslexia and you are poor, you are in trouble, because you can't afford to go get specialized tutoring outside of school. And if you're not getting it in your school, you're not going to be able to read. And right now, not being able to read creates barriers for you to being able to do what you want to do with your life. 100 years ago, if you couldn't read, like, oh, well, you're not bookish, go do something else. And I do think that as the 21st century goes on and we get more technology, maybe reading will become less of such a critical skill. But right now, reading is really very critical. And this is a civil liberties issue when kids can't read. So they were talking about how there's a crisis in reading across the board, not just, you're in a school where 70% of the kids are not reading. It doesn't matter so much if you have dyslexia or not. Nobody's reading right now very well. So we're really trying to look at like the science of reading and how can we teach reading in a way that's more effective and data driven. And they were saying that people of color are really, really vulnerable regardless of the other variables. And this is a civil liberties issue. So we're talking about how important it is to make sure that we do that science of reading. They were talking about that science of reading 101. Please look into it. There's a whole bunch of information. We know what to do. There's people that have started different movements to try to bring the dyslexia knowledge base into the 21st century. People that are MLL are both more likely to be over-identified of needing special education and under-identified as having dyslexia. So they get put in special ed, but people don't recognize that, oh, actually, they also have dyslexia, because you can have issues with learning to read because you're MLL, but also have issues because you're not hearing sounds in their order. That they both can be true. And then COVID has just magnified all of these issues and accelerated them. So don't despair. There's a lot we can do. The research shows that systematic structured literacy instruction benefits all learners, not just those with dyslexia. So what works for our kids with dyslexia works for everybody. And so advocates are really promoting right now getting the science of reading into our classrooms. And as I was telling you, Dr. Shaywitz in the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, they have put together something called the 21st Century Act. Go check it out. And they're really working with Congress and trying to get some laws passed to acknowledge that dyslexia exists and trying to help us provide supports so that we can basically, if you catch this early, you really can change the whole family tree. Early screening is so important. I also want to tell you, though, it's never too late. The earlier, the better, but it's never too late. So this is what the National Reading Panel says that we need to do. This is part of the beginning stage for all learners, according to the science of reading. We need to explicitly teach students phonological awareness in the alphabet, explicitly teach them phonics in a structured way. After kids are at 95% accuracy, then you can start working on fluency. I think a big thing that happens in schools is they go right to fluency training with kids before they're ready. So if your kid's doing a Read Naturally program, it's fantastic, but make sure that they're ready for it. Because if they're not reading at 95% accuracy at grade level, they're not ready for Read Naturally. You need to do some sub-skill work first and then move them to fluency. You want to explicitly work on vocabulary and not just what the word elephant means in one setting, but what it means in a lot of different settings. What does it mean to have an elephant in the room? And then we want to teach explicitly comprehension strategies. They are adding a sixth one recently, something called morphology. This is your ability to know that there's little meaning chunks. I've been sneaking it in with you because you know what phono means now. Phono is the Greek morpheme or meaning unit for sound. So you can explicitly teach kids that ing means right now. So when I say jumping, I'm telling you more than jump. which is the base word, I'm saying that jumping is happening right now. So you could explicitly teach that, and that really accelerates the whole process of breaking words into parts and helps kids spell. By the way, you guys, that's what those spelling bee kids are doing. Can you tell me where the word comes from? They're looking for hints about, we will spell words differently based on where they come from. And they want to know if you can use it in a sentence. They're looking for meaning clues, looking for that morphology. So people with dyslexia need lots of repetition. The key is to try to make that repetition kind of fun. Think of a Geico commercial. Geico commercials work because the repetition is kind of obnoxious, but they make a story and they make you laugh, and there's color and there's a jingle. So you would tolerate that repetition. And even, I mean, the one place where humans really retain our tolerance for repetition is in music. We want to explicitly work on fluency when students are ready. At 95% accuracy, then we're ready for fluency training. We want to teach them that ing means right now, and check your suffix. You want to make sure that they're having the hand help the eye, the mouth help the ear, multisensory in our instruction. And we want to work on at all the different levels: reading, writing, and spelling. Sound, letter, word, sentence, passage, build up. And I want to get them out of controlled readers, which are fantastic, but they're limited. So you want to start with controlled readers. It's that those are your Bob books, that follow a pattern. They're fine, but they'll say he's my pal, and we don't talk that way. We see he's my friend. So you want to move them through the controlled readers and get them into real literature experiences as soon as possible. What you families can do out there, if your kiddo is working on sub-skill and they're not reading at grade level, and so reading is boring and I don't want to do it, that's where, again, Learning Ally can come in and be a huge help, because they can read whatever their friends are reading with Learning Ally while you're working on those sub skills and getting their skills higher so that they are ready for that fluency work. And you want to be courteous to their intellect. So I love doing it the way I do it when I teach kids about linguistics, because even if they're in 5th grade, I'm teaching them about what sounds are doing, but I'm teaching it in a way that's very courteous to their intellect. So there's some research-based programs in our area that have local trainings. Orton Gillingham derived ones are Barton, Slingerland, Spalding, and Wilson. And the linguistic derived ones, the speech to print, letters, Lindamood Bell Lips, and Wired for Reading. And these all fit in. Not all of them are MSLIC accredited. MSLIC is an accreditation process. I can tell you more about that later after the talk. But you can look for MSLIC to see if they've met the standards of an international accreditation process and if they follow the science of reading. So after 14 months of tailored instruction, he was reading slightly above grade level. Yay, Max. And now he's pursuing his dream of soccer in South America. Okay. So that is the end of my presentation. I can stay for questions. So I'm going to pass the baton back over to our facilitators.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. That was fantastic. We've got a lot of questions, so we'll see what we can get through. We have our interpreters for about 10 more minutes. The first one is, there's two together. Is there a relationship between dyslexia and auditory processing disorder? And how can that affect dyslexia, and how can you remediate it?
That one does not come up in the literature around co-occurrence. With that said, I have had kiddos in my career who have had both. So I'm not saying they don't co-occur, but it isn't common. The best way that I can explain an auditory processing is like if you're in a room and there's lots of people talking around you and you just can't hear the people in front of you, but it's like that times 100. So if there's any sort of noise outside of what they're trying to listen to, they just can't screen it out. And that is something separate from dyslexia. So you could be somebody who has that issue, and then you also have the processing issues, but they don't co-occur as much as the other, the more likely co-occurrence are dysgraphia by far, and dyscalculia, or having trouble with math. And that's usually around math facts or getting sequencing. So like in algebra, you'll get the sequencing out of order. Their concepts of math are intact as expected, but their low order processing parts of math can impact it.
Got it. Thank you. And that was partially Yana's question, and looks like she has some follow-up. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Yana. So I'm wondering if, because I do have auditory processing memory challenge, and I have an undiagnosed dyslexia and other stuff like dysgraphia. So that's really fun, really challenging. I mean, it also, like you said, comes out at certain times more than others. But I do wonder, when you were talking about the auditory, well, it struck me as like auditory memory, and I do not remember the verbiage you used, but that's where I was headed with my question. There were a couple of words that sounded like auditory memory to me. I can't remember what they were.
Well, phonological memory and auditory memory are, there's probably a Venn diagram there. So that is probably where there's an overlap. But like what I have found in the literature, I did not see a high enough rate where it was showing up where people were studying it. And in my practice, I've only had 2 kids over the years that had auditory discrimination, processing issues and dyslexia. So it's not that it doesn't occur, but it's just not as common.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a few more from the chat, and then I see your hand there, and then I'll come to you. The next question: for a bilingual child, spoken fluent in both, where one language is transparent and the other is not, English, would it help to prioritize one over the other when working on writing and reading?
Yes. Yes. In a word, yes. It's one of those things where you want to, it kind of depends on which processing issue they may be experiencing. Phonological awareness is going to express itself differently than the orthographic. So if they don't have phonological processing, but they do have the orthographic problem, they're going to find English a lot more challenging because English has such a difficult orthographic choice, and you don't have as many letter choices in Spanish. So it does kind of depend on what the processing problems are and how they're going to manifest. But we do know that, if I'm going to say off the cuff without knowing the specific situation, picking one and focusing on it is probably going to benefit.
Great. And another question, which is very Seattle specific. Can you explain how Wired for Reading and SIPs are aligned or different, considering that that's the district's intervention?
I don't know enough about SIPs. My understanding is that it is structured and it has a phonics component. I'm not sure how much phonological processing it has in it, and if it's something that concentrates on the segmenting and moves it beyond just in those early grades. So I just don't know enough about it. But kids with dyslexia, they really need that explicit instruction in those 5, and really you should add that morphology. And so you can kind of look at what SIPs does and see if it's checking the box. I think Wired for Reading is just much more in depth. We go into the linguistics and what the body is doing to produce those sounds. So it just approaches that from it. We try to really explain the why and try to get into like, we structure everything about where words come from. So we're bringing in more than just like the memorizing, which a lot of phonics programs are just memorizing. And we just know that my students are weaker. I'm weaker at being just strict memorizing. If you can make it meaningful, if you can connect it to story, if you can connect it to big picture, you're connecting into more the way that a person's brain who has dyslexia is kind of set up to learn.
Great, thank you. Lior, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, so good evening. It was amazing. First of all the parents that hear us, I think we can do a change in our school if maybe we change the law that the general teacher need at least 20% of the clock hours about special education. Because even if our kids going to get like 2 or 3 hours help, the other hours they're going to be with general teacher, and the general teacher need to know more about special education. That's how we can actually affect on our school, and I'd be happy to push it more to help. And second, in Seattle area, we talk about a lot about the population of the twice exception kids, gifted kids with I feel that they not get the gifted program. They're not, they cannot pass that, but they cannot get the special education too, because they're so smart, so nobody find out. They're still on the norm, because even if they can read 20%, they understand what's going on. I don't know, my personal kids, they can read at age 2.5, but they have zero phonetic awareness, like the sight words. It's like thousands of words, but all 3 of them have terrible with writing. And I'd be happy to read more article about it.
Yeah, you want to look at articles around dysgraphia and written expression. And that's going to be where the child maybe doesn't have dyslexia, but they have dysgraphia. So you can not have the phonological processing problems at all, but you do have some of the problems with the letter awareness. So it's hard to learn that code in a memorizing traditional fashion. So then that's when it impacts spelling, and then that can cascade into them not wanting to write.
They can recognize which word is the right spelling, but they cannot do it by themselves, even like a simple word.
Yeah, there's a difference between receptive knowledge. So I can, like, I have a terrible orthographic coding ability. It's challenged. I'm working on it. Growth mindset. I can spot the right one though. I read a lot, so I'm like, oh, that's the one I want, but I can't recall it. So there's receptive knowledge, and I can do okay with that, but my expressive knowledge is weak. So that's where also I will say, you guys, shout out to the 21st century. Let's get kids. Here's my goal with my students. I'm not going to make you all into spelling bee champs at all, but my goal is to have them have an ability to get the sounds in the right order, to have a vowel sound for every syllable beat, and then have a reasonable choice. So especially as they get older, that they do TION for shun and vacation, because my students will learn, like, that's a Latin-based word, that's a suffix, this is how you spell it. So it sounds in the right order, vowel sound for every syllable beat, and a reasonable choice. That gets them close enough where then the spell check will know what they're trying for, or they'll be able to pick it out in that receptive knowledge. Spelling is a really hard one to remediate. It can get better, but I'll tell you, reading just kicks butt over spelling. You get those kids reading and they go, wachoo, soaring up high. I always joke with them that reading is just lapping the spelling. And every once in a while we have to stop and say, let's check in on spelling and see how they're doing. And that's just the difference between receptive knowledge, responding to the print, and expressive knowledge, generating the print. It's harder to express than be receptive.
And they have something that insurance can pay, because I try to go to a specific things and it's so expensive. Like, what is the name? They have something the insurance going to pay or no?
It's terrible. I mean, this is a problem. This is why this is a civil liberties issue, because right now, if you don't get it in the schools, and then you can't afford to get outside tutoring, and if you are an outside tutor, the medical says, oh, that's the school, and the school says, oh, that's the medical. So nobody is going to cover that. So it gets to be a real problem. And I do agree with you that, I mean, the good news is that the science of reading, what the research is showing, is it benefits all learners, not just those that are in special ed, especially kids in special ed, but all our learners will do really well if we are really systematic and structured in our literacy. And we approach this as a data-driven way of teaching. And I will tell you, people will take my teacher's course. They will have just come out of a master's program in reading, and they're like, we learned none of this. We didn't learn in phonics. And it has to do with the state test. The Washington state test to become a teacher doesn't have any questions about phonics, much less phonological awareness. 0 questions on phonics. So there's a problem at our teachers' college. There's a problem with those state tests. And until we change that, the teacher colleges are like, gosh, we've got to make sure we prepare these teachers so that they can pass the test, so they can become a teacher. So I've talked to people at SU and at UW, and they both have said, we need to change the tests. Teacher test so that would be as a parent advocate, that would be a good spot to go look at. I know there's some other parent advocate groups in the area that are looking at that.
I think we need to push the in-service for next year, going to include like lecture with you. We can control what's going to be in the in-service day for next year. And
yeah, and there are also the other one that people in the area use quite a lot, that explains the what and the why, is the letters program. That's an excellent one that's very affordable for districts. So that's another one to look at.
Laura, thank you. I want to just jump in for a moment. We do have to dismiss our interpreters because we have them only until 8:30.
Okay, but I can stay if others have questions. I can stay.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, interpreters. We appreciate your time, and I'll get a few more questions too. I'm going to skip through because there's some that seemed really important. You talk about catching it early. What is an appropriate younger end of an age that you could catch dyslexia early and test for?
Preschool, you can see this in preschool. A lot of those things I was talking about with the phonological processing are things that happen at age 3 and 4. Also, family history, red flag. You should automatically keep an eye on a kiddo if there's a family history. So there are things we can see really early.
And then linking to that question, you talked a lot about kindergarten and first grade as benchmarks, but what do you think about those impacted by the pandemic and sort of missing those important years? What do you think about?
Oh, that's a great question. We're all very worried about that. So, I mean, the good news is that we know from the research that if you get in there and really intensely work on these things, kids can make great strides in catching up pretty fast. But I think our problem is that I think teachers don't know. They don't have this training in teachers' college. It's a real problem. So a big part of it, and I do think districts are doing a good job. There's a lot of runway with the new law, and I have seen them, and they're reaching out to different training. I mean, there's no one, I really want to make sure everybody knows there's no one best training. My training, I love it. It's fun. It's not the best. There is no best training. Once a training meets the standards of the National Reading Panel, then districts start to have some choices. What I try to do is by bringing in that linguistics, I can hit those kids that are older. This program works really well with kids that are in high school. I myself, I didn't share this story, but I was not diagnosed until I was 19. I was in college. So it's never too late. My spelling and reading is much better than it was, but it would have been better if I had been caught when I was in first grade, when I first started having trouble.
That goes along with another question. If you have an older child that's diagnosed and you suspect that your younger one, likely is, what can you do to help them even before they're diagnosed?
Well, it depends on their age. So that's a very age specific, because you really don't want to be doing a lot with print necessarily with those preschoolers, and even some kindergartners may not be ready to interact a lot with print, but you can do a whole lot to play with sounds and your awareness of the sounds. So, I mean, honestly, nursery rhymes are working on rhyme, keeping track of syllable beats, but being very playful with it. So, it just really depends on the age. If they are first or second grade, get them into intervention. Don't wait.
And is social pragmatic communication disorder a comorbidity of dyslexia?
Not that I saw in my literature review. No, but that doesn't mean it's not. But I know that in my last talk, people were asking about apraxia, and it wasn't in my literature review. And when I checked on that with the University of Washington, sometimes it's just because we haven't put our arms around how common that particular issue is, much less how much it has a co-occurrence. So it could be that there is, but we just haven't studied it enough to see the co-occurrence.
I don't think I asked this one already. Is there overlap in phonological memory errors in kiddos who have dyslexia and ADHD?
What you said, yeah, what I would say is that whole directions, you give them directions to go upstairs and they don't know what, that can also be caused by them going, their executive director is just kind of not paying attention anymore. The way that I think of it is like, if I suddenly just got up and left you guys all here, and you're like, well, wait a minute, she was just in the middle of talking. That's what it's like when your executive functioning is in and out. And we know that kids that have attention deficit, there's a chemical that dumps that allows their brain to go, don't respond to that stimuli. It's basically, that's its job. So there's been a little humming over here on my computer. I've been ignoring it because my executive director, the chemical dumped in my brain went, that's not important. Focus on the screen. But if I had attention deficit, I would be really hard to screen that out because my brain isn't able, the chemical dumps, but the responders don't respond. And that's what the medicine does. It allows kids to have those responders respond, and then suddenly they can attend. So with that said, there's some new research to show that some kids that are diagnosed with attention deficit have, there's a cognitive load that's happening to them, and their brain just is done. And so it's not even attention. They're calling it sluggish cognition. And it's this new emerging research. And they're like, they don't have attention deficit at all, especially if you have a child who doesn't respond to medication. And that's not to say that they're not sensitive to medication. Like maybe they responded to the medication, but it made them so they didn't want to eat. That's different. But like if you have a kiddo that you tried the medication and it just didn't seem to make a bit of difference, they just make it like their brain just is done. Like it just, there's so much more energy that I need to use to be able to do this. I just have to stop and I need to take a break. So I feel like we're learning more and more, especially now because we have so many different ways that we can study this with genetics and brain functioning. And it's just amazing. You guys just asked me for a glass of water and I gave you a water show. Apologize. I do that sometimes. Over answered.
Thank you. The next one is, are you familiar with 95% and is it beneficial for dyslexia and dysgraphia students?
I don't know a whole lot about it. I really don't want to say. I mean, I've seen it and I've been like, oh, that looks really interesting to me, but that's all I can speak to. So I'm going to pass on that one because I don't know enough. Okay.
And what if a kid isn't diagnosed until later, until middle school? Can you adapt Wired for reading for older kids?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think that actually Wired for Reading is really, really set up for older kids. Works really well because you can really adjust it. So I'm teaching you linguistics. Hey, usually get that in college. Let's talk about, and we might use some of the bigger kid terms, people-friendly terms instead of the linguistic terms you get in college. But we're going to start with history or science. Which one do you want to start with? And you can really cater it to what they need. That's not to say that the other programs with a really skilled instructor who really loves that program, most of the people I know that are really good are trained in multiple methods. So you just want to respond to the kiddo, whatever age you want to respond to the kiddo. So I know this kid loves soccer. I'm going to try to bring in my analogies around soccer. I know this kid loves, drawing. I'm going to have them do a lot of art. You just want to adjust it to that person.
Gotcha. How are you doing on time, Laura? Are you okay to answer a few more?
I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you have recommendations of the best places to go for early testing? Would testing be that early? What places are good for?
There's so many good ones, but you guys, you know how everybody is like completely overbooked. Like it's just the reality of our world right now, So I have a list of people that do diagnostic work, and they are some of them are covered by insurance. So definitely go look. Just be ready to get on wait lists. Check to see if they're on your insurance. If they're not on the like, let's say you're like, okay, here are the people on my insurance. I'm going to go down and see who I can work with. Use some of this terminology. Say, well, how do you test for phonological awareness? How do you test for orthographic mapping or orthographic coding? And if they don't know what you're talking about, find another person, because those should be things that they absolutely look at if they're looking at dyslexia. And then be ready to get on several wait lists and then get on their cancellation list. And you're just going to need to wait to get into testing. With that said, you don't need to wait to get intervention. If you're like, this is sounding like my child, it's a very common learning difference. And I have people that'll call me and I can tell like I'm part of the answer. I may not be the starting spot. So you'll have people that can help guide you, but get onto wait lists, poke. Also, there are teachers that are taking these courses, their own money, their own time. They're taking their weekends. Go thank a teacher. Do what you can do to try to advocate, because teachers really do care. They just don't have the knowledge and the information. They didn't get it in teachers college. So they're working to catch up on that.
And then here's a question about, you mentioned that you did a research study for dyslexia. Do you know of any other research studies or other creative ways to get information that might be more affordable than those who can't afford, formal evaluation?
Well, there were two people that were really studying this at the University of Washington, and one of them retired and the other one moved to Stanford. So there used to be like even 8 years ago, a lot more. And then earlier, just so many opportunities. And what I know right now is those opportunities are not there. Now, there could be some that I'm just not aware of. You might contact the University of Washington School Psychology Department. That's where a lot of them were being held. Also, the speech and language department there at the University of Washington. So those would be places to see if any new researchers are coming in or if there's any graduate students. You can get really affordable testing at the University of Washington and at SU. Well, I'd say SU and University of Washington, and also look at the speech and language, the school psychology in both of those. And a lot of times they have people that are training. And so then you can get very affordable or even sometimes free assessments. I don't know the numbers, or I would share them. I don't know them anymore. They've changed.
And then another
SU
question
Seattle
about,
University. Thank you. I'm saying SU. My daughter's graduating from there, so I'm like SU. Like I've gotten the acronym. It's Seattle University.
gotcha. Another question about if your middle schooler is undiagnosed, what can you do?
I think that you can. I guess I can answer this for what would I do. You're going to need to decide whether you want to go straight for using your resources and your time to go for intervention versus whether you want to go with getting an assessment. They both have their advantages. I think that probably push comes to shove, you want to have that money go toward getting some intervention. But one thing that the assessment does do is it provides legal protection. So someone like me, I'm fortunate enough to be twice exceptional, which is why they didn't catch me, but I would have failed out of college. I would not be sitting here today. I would not be talking with you if it weren't for the fact that when I was 19, they went and got me diagnosed, and then that afforded me accommodations. And then suddenly I was a straight A student in college instead of failing out of college. So if without that assessment, I would not have had the accommodations. So there is value to that can't be ignored. With that said, I mean, the best thing that is being able to know what to do, to have strategies to be able to cope with my processing differences. So I would do both. I would get on the wait lists, and then I would start looking into some interventionists. I worry that in middle school, a lot of times the schools, what they do for special education is they help kids with their homework, but I'm not sure they're going to get in and intervene. Depends on the school, I suppose.
Right. And do you know if there's any medication to support dyslexia?
No, there's no medication that makes one whit of difference. If you have a child that has attention deficit, it can be transformative. I had a kiddo and we really thought that we were having some significant dyslexia going on. We also saw signs of attention deficit. We got on medicine and he did not need me anymore. It was there. It was milder. And as soon as that piece was taken care of, I was just overkill and he was fine. So definitely something to look into. You really want to, if you suspect attention deficit, it's about 40%, 20 to 40% comorbidity. Usually it's the inattentive type that you see. You want to address that. I always tell my parents, I say, I need you to address any handwriting problems and any attention problems. Those need to be addressed. And then you start working with me. But those are priorities, especially what the researcher said is that until and unless we address the attention problems, my work may not transfer. So we don't have to do medicine, but we can't do nothing. But no, there's no medicine for dyslexia.
Right.
This is Yana. I just want to really quick explain why I asked, because it's not always, I, for example, didn't know that there's a medication for social skills. And my son was part of the study. It was amazing how that helped. So that's why I asked, I wouldn't even think to ask if we didn't go through that study. Thank you.
Yeah, there's nothing.
And then I saw another question. If you get diagnosed early, as a young child, do you need to be re-diagnosed again later to get SAT accommodations? Or does the diagnosis stay with you?
Well, I think that if you qualify for special education, that you're in that process. And so the reevaluations happen as part of that process. But if you have, personally, I think this is a problem with dyslexia that you don't have with other disabilities. If you have anxiety and you have a doctor that shows that you have anxiety and it's an adverse impact, you don't have to retest for anxiety. You as long as you have those adverse impacts, you get your accommodations. But for some reason with dyslexia, they make parents go through this whole thing again every 3 years. And it's just a civil liberties issue because it's a huge barrier for families that can't afford testing the first time, much less testing every 3 years. So unfortunately, right now, they do make you test every 3 years. One thing that happened with my family is my son failed the MSP writing. And honestly, you guys, I was like, yes, because he was in the high cap program, but he had dyslexia. And they're like, we've never had a kid in the high cap program fail the MSP writing. And I'm like, well, here you remember the dysgraphia? And there's just sometimes when they are gifted, they have a hard time like putting together that low average could be, could still be somebody who has dyslexia and dysgraphia. They were really struggling with that when he was young. So I didn't have to retest him when he was in 5th grade, but then they were absolutely not going to give him his accommodations for high school unless I retested. So we had to jump through and it was very expensive. So dyslexia, yes. Attention deficit or anxiety, no. So a lot of times that's what they'll say is, oh, do they have anxiety? Oh, do they have anxiety? And you're like, well, not if you help them. But sometimes that's a way for them to give them those accommodations without you having to do that extra expense. It's a loophole.
And Laura, I appreciate you staying longer. And with respect to your time, I think we'll do about 1 or 2 more questions and then wrap up. I saw a good one here, though. Is testing standardized for dyslexia, or are there skills in the delivery of the tests that the person administering needs to have?
Yeah,
so does your evaluator matter?
Yeah, you need to have credentials to be able to conduct a diagnostic assessment. So I have, my background is in neuropsychology and school psychology, and yet outside of a school district, I would not conduct testing because I don't have the PhD and I haven't gone through the licensing and processes and frankly, you guys, I decided to go, I don't want to say, I want to go, what do you do about it is where I wanted to put my attention. So yeah, you need to have somebody who has, if it's going to be a legal document, a documentation, it needs to be done by a school psychologist within a school setting that has those credentials. And if you go outside, you're probably looking at somebody who's got a PhD and is a licensed clinical psychologist or has a degree that, and some have degrees in learning disabilities. So you need to look for those credentials. I started to say, and I don't think I finished, I do have a resource list on my website of people that I like. It's not an exhaustive list of people in the area, but it's people that I've seen really good, strong reports. And all of those people are qualified to provide an assessment that would provide legal documentation. And I'm like, if you're going to spend that extra money, be careful. I've seen some really terrible tests and they haven't looked at any of these processing issues. And these are people that they don't have the credentials to be able to do this. So be careful because you are spending precious resources and time.
And then this last question, looks like a few people are interested in this one. For the kiddos you've had that have had CAPD and sound discrimination challenges, was the dyslexia remediation helpful? Like you mentioned how helpful it was to get your attention issues addressed. What about with sound discrimination?
You have to help me out because one of the things that I have because of my dyslexia, I'm really bad at what I call the LMNOPs. Acronyms.
I think it's,
so
I'm not sure what the C is, but audio processing disorder.
Central auditory processing disorder.
I just don't see that very much. So I just don't see it. If I had a kiddo that had that as a primary diagnosis, I really want to collaborate with an SLP that has that training and specialty and make sure that maybe I'm part of the solution, but I may not be the start. And I'm going to be collaborating with a team, but honestly, and it's not to say that they're not out there. I haven't worked with a lot of them, kids with that diagnosis. So I better pass on that one too. It's a good question though.
Yeah, well, thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering all these questions and for your presentation. And for those of you who are still left, I just want to give a plug for our Seattle Special Education PTSA. Our general membership meeting is May 17th at 7, and everyone is welcome. We also mentioned Literacy Advocacy 101, which is on May 23rd. And we also have a couple sip and chats coming up, which are just really informal gatherings to chat and ask questions. May 19th, we have one for our deaf and hard of hearing community families. And then we have an open discussion, sip and chat on June 2nd, which is any topic, anything, just come to chat and make community. Janice, I don't know if you have any more announcements. Otherwise, Thank you everyone for coming and for Laura for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. It was fun. I'm sorry when you said don't talk too fast. I'm like, uh-oh. I talked too fast. So I hope I didn't go too fast for our interpreters, but they look like they were doing a great job.
I think they kept
I'm
up
going to
okay.
stop. Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording.